What's happening, YouTube? This is Robert, and this is video number 8 of my HTML series. In this video, we're going to go over computer code, entities, and symbols. So computer code is anything that you want to put in or get out from a computer, input and output, represented to your users inside of your text. If you're writing a paragraph or you want to tell your user something, this is how we're going to do it. The code opening and closing tag is going to represent programming code. So that can be mathematical inputs that we want to put into the computer or code that we're actually writing that we want to represent to our users that we might be putting into the computer. Our keyboard and voice input is going to be used by a KBD tag. This is something that you want the user to do, such as press Ctrl plus R to refresh a browser page, and you want to represent that inside of text. Computer output, if we've put something into the computer and it gives us a confirmation or an error, we can represent that inside of the sample text. And var tags are going to represent variables. So in math, E equals MC squared. The E is a variable, the MC are variables, so we can represent all of those using our var tags. And we have seen pre-formatted text before, so we know that this helps us organize our information so that it's output in an expected way. We can use that in combination with things like our code tag. Starting out with the code tag, we have our opening and closing. And what we'll do is, in this case, we'll start out with mathematical input to the computer. So let's say that we used a equals j divided by 3, z equals b3 times 5, and x equals a plus z divided by 2. So let's save that and open it up in a browser. And as you can see, we have everything lined up in a single line. We have our a equals j divided by 3, and then our next equation and our next equation, and they're lining up next to each other, even though in the browser we put them underneath each other. There's a couple different ways that if you want to drop each equation down into its own line, you can do so. And the first way is with a line break. Each one that you want to have its own line, you can put a line break after, and the next equation will drop down to the next line. Let's save that. When we refresh our page, we can see that we have a equals j divided by 3, our next equation, each one getting its own line. Another way we can do that is to use our pre-formatted text. So we have our pre-tag, we press enter, we've already cut out our code, and we're just going to paste it right back in. Now you're going to notice that the code is a little bit off. Something you can do to fix this, instead of just pressing Control V, you can press Control Shift V and it'll paste in there the appropriate way. So now let's save that, and in the browser we'll hit refresh. And a couple of things. One, we didn't take out the line breaks, so it's going to put an extra line in there. Additionally, it's going to have an extra line up here, and it's going to preserve all of the tabbing in front of those because of the pre-formatted text. To fix that, we have to put the code tag all the way up to the pre-formatted text so it thinks that there are no spaces, and also no spaces after the code tag. Then we get rid of both of our line breaks, and we can hold the mouse wheel, click it down, and drag it up, and it's going to create two different cursors. And then we can get rid of our tabs. Save our content, and when we refresh, we can see a tight little group of pre-formatted code text. Now this looks ugly in the browser in my opinion. It's not my favorite way to present code because it looks super messy. My preference is to get rid of the pre-formatted text, keep the line breaks, and use our code this way. And when we refresh, you're going to notice the spacing between the lines looks slightly different. So let's go ahead and refresh. And it's just a very slight difference, but I think it looks a little bit cleaner. And that's it on the code tag for the moment. Let's go beneath that and create a paragraph. Inside of that paragraph, let's talk about what we want the user to do. Press Ctrl R to refresh the page. Let's save that and refresh, and we can see press Ctrl plus R to refresh the page. This looks pretty straightforward. If I'm talking to a user, they might know exactly what I'm trying to get them to do. But to really define a difference, that KBD tag is going to help us tell the user not only if they can see it, but also for screen reader or accessibility users that can't necessarily see as well on the content and they're more listening for it. That screen reader is going to help them identify the difference between a paragraph and something that we're trying to get them to do. So let's take out that Control R and use our KBD tag and paste in our Control R, save that. Now when we refresh, we have the Control R is going to be in a monospace font, which is the default font for the browser for this type of code. Same thing with our code tag. It's also using that monospace font. But if we go ahead and inspect the page and we use our selector here, we can walk up and we can see that this is the body of the text. We can see that this is a code tag and it's only going to take up as much space in total as is necessary for the content. In our paragraph, you can see that it goes all the way across until we reach our KBD tag. And that's going to let the screen reader know that this is a different type of tag than our paragraph, and it's going to read that differently to the user and tell them that we want an action taken. Beneath that, let's go ahead and write one more paragraph that tells the user what kind of response that we might expect from a computer. And what I wrote is, if you enter the code incorrectly, you'll receive an error response. Inside the browser, when I refresh, again, you can tell that this sentence tells the user basically what will happen, but it doesn't emphasize what the computer will output to them. So all we want to let them know is that it's going to output error. And we can use our SAMP tag and paste that error in there, save that, refresh. And now you can see that that monospace font identifies that word, the error, the actual response from the computer, as different from the rest of the paragraph. Again, using our selector, we can see that this is an inline tag. It's only going to take up that amount of space and then let everything else float next to it. Now let's highlight this code and press Ctrl-Shift-D to copy and paste it, and right between them we're just going to put a couple of line breaks to separate them out. Now inside of this code, what we can do is we can represent variables. A is a variable, J is a variable, and so on. The easiest way to do this is to highlight just the variables you want by holding Control, clicking and dragging, and highlighting all the variables that you want to represent throughout. Then you can press Alt-Shift-W, and that's going to create a tag around each one of the sections that you highlighted. And it's going to default to the paragraph tag, but we're going to change that into a variable tag, VAR. Now let's save that. When we refresh the browser, you're going to notice that each one of these variables is going to change ever so slightly. So this A, Z, and X look different than this A, Z, and X. So let's really take a look at these side by side to see the differences. So we've got our code, KBD, SAMP, variable, and pre-tags. Let's save that, refresh, and here we go. We have our code tag, our KBD tag, our SAMP tag, and our var tag, followed by our pre-tag. And the main difference between these, the code tag and the KBD and the SAMP are all going to be inline, and they're all going to be monospace. As you can see, each one tells you what type of tag it is when you highlight it, so that screen readers know the difference in what you're attempting to do. The pre-tag is also going to have the monospace font just like the other three here, but it's not going to be inline. These three are inline and only take up as much width as is necessary for content, whereas the pre-tag is going to be a block level tag that's going to take up the entire width of the page. And finally, the variable tag, the var tag, is going to be italicized. So if we go into our editor and create an italicized text that says var tag, when we refresh our browser, they look identical to each other, except for when we go up and we take a look, both of them are inline, but one is italicized text, whereas the other is a variable tag, and the screen reader will be able to tell the user the difference. And that's it on computer code, pretty straightforward stuff. As far as entities and symbols, these are going to be used for programming characters and non-keyboard characters. They're replacing characters that we can't use or don't have on our keyboard. For mathematical and programming, for Greek letters, and other special characters such as you see here. Now, the syntax for those is entity name and entity number. You can use one or the other. The browser is going to have more support for numbers than it is names, but names are also easier to remember than numbers. And with the entity name, you're going to have the ampersand and a semicolon with the entity name between, whereas the number is going to have an ampersand and a pound sign or a hashtag and a semicolon with the entity number in between. Taking a look at a few different entities and symbols here, we have our non-breaking space to create an extra space. We have our less than sign, or our opening angle bracket as I sometimes call it, our greater than sign, which is our closing angle bracket, ampersand, double quotation mark, copyright, mathematical, Greek alphabet and a couple extra special characters. So let's play with those a little bit. And let's say that we were trying to write some code. And inside that code, we wanted to represent that we had our H1 and that we also had a paragraph. And this is what we actually are showing our users that we're writing. Let's save that and refresh our page. And inside of the browser here, we can see that it's not showing us the tags. In this case, we actually want our users to see the tags. So what we can do is we can go into our editor, and using control, we can put several cursors by each less than symbol and delete that, put and LT and the semicolon. And then for our greater than symbols, we can do the same thing, only with GT. So delete each one of our greater than symbols and instead use ampersand, GT, semicolon. And now we have the formatting that we want. Refresh our page. And there you have it. Now everything is written out in the monospace font representing code that we want to give our users. Now again, code is going to only be inline levels. So if we want to create line breaks after that, we need to do so with real tags. Now when we refresh, we get more of the format that we want and expect. If you're writing out a lot of code that you want to use to represent to your users, instead of using these line breaks, that's when the pre-formatted text is going to come in handy, because you can pre-format everything and tab it out in the way that you want, and it's going to display to the user without using a bunch of extra tags. One that we've discussed before is if we had a sentence, and inside of that sentence we were trying to create a bunch of extra spaces between two sentences. So if we save that and go over to the browser, when we refresh, there's only a single space. Again, the browser is only going to recognize one space regardless if you press enter or space out a bunch of times. So to create a space that doesn't break your code or break down to another line, we can use the original space, then we can use and NBSP followed by the semicolon, that stands for non-breaking space. If we want several of those, we can highlight, press Ctrl C, V, save that. Now when we refresh, it's creating all the extra spaces that we want. And just to show you, instead of using the name, the entity name, let's use an entity number, which in this case is going to include the pound, and the number is going to be 160. Let's save that and refresh our browser, and you can see there was no change at all. So you can use the entity name or you can use the entity number. But again, there is more support in the browser for entity numbers. There's a wider range of characters if you use a number rather than the name. Now let's just go ahead and do a couple more here. We have the ampersand, the quotation, copy, summation, alpha and zeta, right arrow, clubs, and the trademark symbol. Let's save that and refresh our page. And as you can see, each one of these are going to be inline level tags. But what I did is I gave you both the name and the number version, so you can see that there's no difference. One thing I want you to notice is that zeta and alpha are capitalized because those names are Greek letter alphabets. And there you have it. Everything is identical to one another. Pretty simple and straightforward. There's going to be a list of entities and symbols. If you hop on and type HTML entities or HTML symbols, you're going to get a very full list of all sorts of different characters. There's more than 10,000 for HTML5. One quick note I want to put down is that locally tested code may display differently than a live website will. You want to build habits in the beginning that help you understand all this content so that when you encounter it later, you know right away what to do. So if I go over here in my browser and I delete all this content and create a paragraph that simply says in double quotes, "This is awesome." When I refresh my browser, you're going to see those double quotes. This is what I'm talking about. We're currently testing our machine locally. We're not actually online. We're not going to a website and having the browser load up the page and bring it back to us from a live server. In this case, it's going to show us those double quotations. In the live browser, it's going to show us and amp semicolon to represent what that should actually be. It's not going to show us the double quote. So just know that if you're in local mode, it may display it, but then when you go to live mode, it's going to display something that you don't want. So know your characters and know that if you encounter that situation, you can always look them up and replace them. Pretty simple. And that's it in this video. If you have any questions, of course, leave comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one.